And I think for anyone who is listening, and any future Africa travelers or existing Africa travelers, I think one thing I've said before is just ask the question. Ask whoever you're dealing with, how does my dollar benefit where I'm going? You'll very quickly either get an answer, and it'll be an answer that makes sense, or you'll just not get an answer. And so I think even if it's great, how is my dollar, how is where I'm staying making an impact to the communities and the land around them?
I really want to talk about, traveling to Africa and booking a safari with you. What does being a B certified corporation have to do with the way that you operate? And why is it important for Africa's economy that we do take these trips? Maybe it wasn't always on your bucket list, but you kind of thought it was something maybe you wanted to do. We can encourage travelers to understand how important it really is for the economy to travel there, to take a safari, and to do it with a company that is B certified.
There's actually such a small percentage of people in the world who are traveling to Africa. And so I think those who know about Africa can kind of have an understanding. But I think for the vast majority, I guess it's most of us about any other international areas, but Africa specifically is starting to gain a lot more attention on the world map of global biodiversity. And there are a lot of critically identified ecosystems in Africa specifically that are vital to mitigating climate change, vital to the future of biodiversity balance and regenerating a kind of nature. And obviously within Africa, we also have huge populations. And so that conversation and the connection between nature, biodiversity, people, communities, and how travel can really be a force for good is a really beautiful, inspiring story. And I think for guests to travel to Africa to know that if they're if they're making wise choices and traveling with an organization, company like Go to Africa or a lodge like Asilia Lodges who have taken the time to become B Corp certified, or there are several other globally recognized certifications. That does take time. And what those certifications do is they enable an audit. So they enable a set of questions, and they range from sustainability questions, reusing, recycling, to people, employee satisfaction questions, to impact questions. They're quite diverse. And what they do is they audit you, and then there's a minimum kind of criteria that you have to meet in order to become certified. But then what I love is what they do thereafter is they then give you, and in B Corp's case, 3 years to say, okay, well, the next time we come to revisit this, we want to see what has grown and what has moved. So it allows you to identify the areas that you are doing well in, identify the areas you're not, but then also be able to make a plan to then close those gaps. So it's a continuous journey. And I think that's what's inspiring, and it's important. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting distracted with the question, but I think from a client's point of view, and it's the same when we're selecting our lodges and properties, it really does make it so much easier for the clients if you see somebody has been accredited by a globally recognized sustainable and impact brand or accreditation, because then you don't have to do as much research. It allows you to trust and know that there really is accountability and trust and a commitment to ongoing growth.
And you hit it on the head. It's about trust and confidence, because not all travelers, and that's fine. Not all travelers are thinking about the difference they're making or conservation. Travel is travel. A holiday, everyone deserves a holiday. And so they plan it. And so this way, if that isn't your number one motivator, you can still take that holiday and know that you don't have to connect the dots, do all that back end research. you can have trust that the company is
Yeah.
doing the right thing.
And I think for anyone who is listening, and any future Africa travelers or existing Africa travelers, I think one thing I've said before is just ask the question. Ask
Yeah.
whoever you're dealing with, how does my dollar benefit where I'm going? You'll very quickly either get an answer, and it'll be an answer that makes sense, or you'll just not get an answer. And so
Yeah.
I think even if it's great, how is my dollar, how is where I'm staying making an impact to the communities and the land around them. So yeah.
That's a very simple way
Yeah.
to, yeah, I love that, to tell people, whether they're traveling to Africa or anywhere else in the world, to ask questions if they do have a question or they're unsure of the credibility of the organization. Because now, as consumers, we have such an opportunity to change the plight of a place based on where we spend our money. And so
Yeah.
it's so important to become more, have that habit become more common. So,
Amy, sorry,
no.
just we hadn't spoken about this, but just on that, I think sometimes guests, or there's sometimes a perception that you are going to be visiting an eco camp that maybe has kind of a eco bathroom, or will maybe be a little bit uncomfortable, and I think I just want to encourage anyone listening. You said something just now that made me think of this. You can still have the safari or the holiday of your dreams. You can absolutely, you do not have to compromise at all. We're not talking about this is a great safari and then this is another one that has a good impact. We're talking about leaders in the safari industry who have the most exceptional camps and most exceptional track record in making a difference. It doesn't have to be an either or, and it doesn't have to be something that's maybe that sounds a little bit kind of hippie, or so we can do that too. But yeah, you can still have the safari of your dreams, but just by choosing kind of the most responsible organization and properties, it will have a greater impact.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think this is the perfect example of why Go to Africa is really, really redefining the luxury safari space. You don't have anything taken away from you, and you still have elevated food and accommodations and experiences, and the peace of mind knowing that you are traveling with a responsible, fee certified company.
Yeah.
Great point. So, you talk a lot about the way you vet your partners, building on that B certification and really intentionally going after partners that are sustainable as well. Can you tell us what does that look like? I know that you've already vetted 80%. Your goal is 100. When you decide who makes the cut, what are you really looking for in a partner?
That's a beautiful question. So we've vetted 100% of them now, and
I'm sorry. Okay.
we've audited all of them. There are two auditing mechanisms. The one we're doing research, that's manual research that we've completed. The other is a very particular survey that we've sent out, and that we haven't finished, or it hasn't been completed by everybody. But what we're looking for, when I started the survey, I looked at kind of globally recognized, like GSTC recognized accreditations, to see how we could match the most useful questions. And a lot of the lodges and camps that I spoke to they do get asked about sustainability. So this is a really important journey for any operator or organization, is to understand your supply chain, as well as for any lodge, as well as for any hotel. And we have researched all of our suppliers, and we're interested in sustainability, reuse, recycle, but we're also interested in the treatment of people, and how many employees are local, how much of the business is going back into benefiting local communities, as well as the environment. So there's a strong piece that's formed our own impact agenda that we're inviting and looking for in partners is more than sustainability, which is wonderful and has to be the start. But how are you regenerating? How are you tipping the scale to make a positive impact? So, and that we look for really in particular projects, active projects that hotels and lodges will have both within the conservation space, the conservation sphere, to increase biodiversity, as well as with communities. How are people in your area benefiting from
Mhm.
tourism and from this particular park or reserve? Because if the communities are not benefiting and not seeing benefit from this, they won't be custodians. They won't be future custodians. And there's a lot of human wildlife conflict that happens between in the borders and in the corridors between the parks and between the communities. Elephants may go out and raid crops. Lion may get out and raid livestock. And so there really needs to be a kind of a lot of collaboration around supporting communities to mitigate those instances, but also ensuring that they're seeing the benefit themselves of whether they're employed through the industry or whether they're seeing other benefits from green economies or blue economies.
Such a great point. And I think for, us, of course, that live in the United States and we don't live in these incredible, wild places where that's just a natural part of life. Think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the difference of seeing these animals as a nuisance versus seeing them as a part of, right, a bigger picture. How are they going to benefit from these animals being here? And so using best practices to help avoid those kinds of conflicts.
We have two really beautiful, really inspiring NGO partners that we work with. And the one focuses on, they've got what they call an elephant aware economy. And so there's this beautiful synergy between supporting locals to mitigate particularly elephants raiding crops, like I was saying just now, and that might be through bees or through trellis fences. What they do is they also, this particular NGO will also encourage and empower and really facilitate communities to develop crafts or to develop elephant friendly, wildlife friendly honey, or and then we're starting to kind of help them get that into the lodges so that that can be a growing economy. So there really can be such a beautiful synergy and collaboration, but you have to work together. And the lodges have got the biggest the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest, the most pressure, right? But there are some incredible stories of success that are that anyone can look at modeling suitable to the context of their area.
And I think that it's really not any different than when you just anywhere in the world, if people aren't supported and brought into the conversation, as you were saying, they're not going to be stewards of the environment, which in turn degrades any tourism destination. So I think it's important if you're for our business listeners out there, it's so important to get in collaboration with your destination, and talk about how can we make this a positive, something positive for the entire community. So,
And
just a
I
little
think,
takeaway for others out there.
yeah, and I think something that kind of lenses that I'm looking at this conversation through, and that we're starting to introduce to our guests through our newsletters, is when you visit a park or a reserve, you will often fly into that area. You'll see animals all around you. You'll have a beautiful lodge, and you may fly out. You may not see communities. You may not have a sense of kind of what's outside of those parks. But when you look at the kind of the map of Africa, and then you look at the ecosystem and then the park, the majority of wildlife, many of the parks and reserves in Africa are not fenced. And the majority of wildlife is actually is actually outside of the parks, which means that they're commuting through communal areas. And I find that fascinating. And I think to kind of lift up your gaze a little bit and see your amazing safari in the Kruger. But if you just had to pretend you were in a helicopter, or you had to walk outside for, a few hundred kilometers, that you would bump into people and crops and livestock and farms and suddenly a wild dog. And like, there's this whole world that's happening outside of just that park. And I think that's the bigger picture that we're looking at. And don't worry, you don't have to worry about that. We're looking kind of at that for you. But that's part of this conversation that we're starting to introduce a little bit more.
This was part of our Go to Africa conversation on the Conscious Check-In podcast. You can watch the full episode on YouTube or listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe.